Welcome to Considering 828, a live stream about theology and what it means for real life. Considering 828 is one of the ministries of Mile One Mission. For more information about Mile One Mission, check us out at mileonemission.ca. And I'm your host, Steve Daw. Well, welcome to another week of Considering Questions. I don't know how many people are going to be on tonight, but I'm glad to see you here. Hello, John. Thanks for saying hello. It's great to see you here. Again, we've been doing this for a couple of weeks now. This is just another week of my dealing with what I think are important questions as Christians for what we deal with in the real world and in society as it stands right now. I honestly, strangely enough, have not received any interesting questions this week. So I'm just going to actually just add this for the moment. If you have questions that you would like me to deal with right now, you can put them into the chat. I will be reading the chat all the way through this. But also, I would like to say that you can drop me a line at steve.daw@mileonemission.ca or steve@considering828.org. Both of them are are emails that I check, well, all the time because, I don't really have a life of my own. In any case, if you are interested in checking those out, go right ahead. In the meantime, I was going to be dealing with tonight, if nobody else has any other questions or objections, the concept of Christianity in the public square. Now, that's a huge question. That's a huge set of ideas because, let's face it, culture is a lot of different things. Including culture would be movies and television and music. Those are parts of culture. Also parts of culture are the news media and the journalism and members of that section of our society, important for the functioning of a proper democracy. Also important in the culture that we're in is politics and law. Now, the thing that's important to recognize is that politics and law actually, I think, are further downstream from the general perspective of culture. And the reason for that's pretty simple. Politics, at least within a democratic society like the one we live in, or quasi-democratic, more to the point, Canada is a constitutional monarchy. It runs downstream from culture generally. Our laws tend to follow the way that the culture has gone. And so what's more important for Christianity is to express the opinions that Christians would have into the society in general so that people can hear them, weigh them, and hopefully find them plausible and come, first of all, to saving faith in Jesus Christ, but also begin producing cultural works such as art or movies or television or those kinds of things that are in keeping with the Christian worldview. I'm not a big fan of Christian movies and television generally, and the reason's pretty simple. If you have to put the moniker of Christian on it, usually it's because that's the only thing that's selling it. Which means, unfortunately, a great deal of Christian music and Christian movies and Christian art are, well, how do I put this nicely? Bad. Not very good for, general populations. Now, of course, there's two reasons for that. One of them's subjective and one of them's objective. I am a believer because I believe in truth and beauty being objective standards and objective things, because I think that's what the Bible says. Whatever is true, whatever is good, whatever is just, think on these things. And if those aren't real things, we can't think on them. So I do think that truth and beauty are objective standards. That's one thing that we need to recognize. So in that sense, Christian art should be able to be good. It should be capable of, eliciting visions of beauty or visions of expressions of truth or expressions of those kinds of things. The problem is we live in a subjective culture, and there are a lot of things that people are going to find, good or bad, based on whether or not they are subjectively appealing. Given that our culture for the last I don't know, 50 years or so, has been moving away from a Christian worldview, it's less likely that some of the ideas that Christians believe will be seen as simply and as easily as beautiful. Um, the way we imagine the world around us has changed. And because of the way that we've imagined the world around us, some things that are said through films might actually be sound less plausible because the plausibility of the culture around us has changed. And you see, this is one of the reasons why I think it's really important for Christians to express our viewpoints in all of the ways we possibly can in the world we're in. Because if we don't express our viewpoints in the culture, in the general populace, in the world around us, then, well, it's harder for people to hear it and to see it as beautiful, to come to see it as even plausible. That's one of the things we're noticing right now in the culture when it comes to, well, a lot of different things. Um, I hate to talk about critical theory, but I probably have to. It's become pretty popular in North America of late. And critical theory is basically the idea that all interactions between people are between people groups, and those people groups have value based on what intersectional values they have. So, for example, I being a white man, uh, I'm a white, actually cisgendered, as I think they call it, man. I'm not high level on the scale. I have a high power dynamic because of historical racism, but I have a low one, a low present value because I don't need to be supported in any way, shape, or form because I apparently have all of the power in the world. That's not quite true because I don't think people are actually defined based on their race or their background. I think people are defined based on what they've been created to be, neither here nor there. But under that, there's probably something that we need to think about a little bit more closely. You see, that kind of thing has become a plausible thing to say. It's become plausible for us to imagine that people are defined by the groups they're part of, instead of being defined by, say, as Martin Luther King would say, the character of our hearts. Instead of that, we're to be judged by whether or not we rank highly on a group scale. That's become plausible because people have been telling for a while now the stories that make that plausible. They've been telling the stories of the oppression of, again, the white cisgendered patriarchy, my thing, and of the downtrodden nature of a whole bunch of different groups. And because of that, the idea is that we can rejigger society. But that's all a story. That's a narrative that's been placed into the culture, into the contexts. And so because of that story, people are more willing to believe it. And that's been a problem for Christians because Christians have not very commonly told our story. Evangelism is not something that Christians are good at. And again, when I say the word evangelism, it comes off as something weird. Evangelism is, me grabbing a little tract of the 5 spiritual laws and just handing it out to you and explaining that you're a sinner and that you need Jesus and that kind of thing. That's not all evangelism is. Evangelism is telling the good news of Jesus Christ. And that is also telling a story. It's telling a story that has for 1,000 years or more been plausible in Western culture. Over the last several hundred years, it's become less plausible because of a whole host of excesses by peoples and groups that have been calling themselves Christian, and a whole bunch of stories that have been told contrary to that viewpoint. But that doesn't change the importance of telling the Christian story. You see, by telling the Christian story, people begin to see the Christian story as more plausible. That's a long way of saying the simple fact. I think we as Christians need to get better at telling about Jesus, about talking about the story of the gospel. And I don't mean just you're a sinner, you need Jesus, and if you come to Jesus, he will save you from your sins. Though that's true, what we need to be now expressing is going to be more than that, a more robust story. The stories that we are competing with are actually pretty robust. They've got a whole bunch of things behind them that, for good or ill, are probably not they don't mesh well with Christianity. You see, and because of that, the Christian story, at least in the simplest form, becomes a heck of a lot less plausible. It's the reason that you'll hear people talking about, how could Jesus die for my sins? Why does anybody need to die for my sins? That's because the concept of sacrifice for the sake of sin has been denigrated. It's kind of been thrown out there because we can have love without any kind of cost. Part of the story that we have. Did God actually create the world good? That's been a story that's been undercut by a whole bunch of scientific theories that overwhelm the general viewpoint, and actually the atheistic formulations of those theories. And so it becomes less possible to be able to say that God created us good, because the idea that God created us has become less plausible through the statements of a whole bunch of different stories. All this is to say, I think that the biggest problem that Christians face isn't that we don't evangelize, that we don't tell people about Jesus. It's that we don't tell about Jesus in a complete way. We as Christians need to believe the gospel. We need to live the gospel in truth. We need to live the gospel completely. We need to live the gospel as a complete story. Now, that's problematic. And that gets me finally to the concept of the separation of church and state. Now, when it comes to that concept, the separation of church and state, that's actually an American thing. It's not true in Canada. Canada doesn't have an official separation of church and state. And that's pretty much true for at least two reasons. The first being that the head of our state, the Queen, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, is also the head of the Church of England. So she is also an ecclesiastical figure as well as a political figure. So there is no separation of church and state. The church and the state, in that sense, are culminating in the same person, Queen Elizabeth II. But also, the separation of church and state doesn't exist in Canada for another reason. That is, the preamble to Canada's Constitution in 1982, the second Constitution, after the British North America Act, which begins with, whereas Canada is founded on principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Canada is not an atheistic country, and it is not a stated secular country. That's not true of our law. It's not true of the way our culture was developed. But still, we have an idea of a separation of church and state, a narrative that somehow we can be separating the church, our religious beliefs, from the way we function in the society. And that's why we use the concept of the separation of church and state. And the problem isn't the culture. The problem is Christians. The problem for Christians isn't that the state or that the society out there is secular. That's going to be normal. People who don't actually believe in Jesus are going to be, acting like they don't believe in Jesus. That's not a surprise. The problem is that we as Christians have a very weak, I think, surfacey kind of understanding of what the gospel is and about what Christianity means for our lives. And because of that, it becomes plausible to people outside to tack on the worldview of the secular world and live according to it. Christianity becomes a tack on, an addition to a normally lived life. A Christian is just a person who lives a normal average life, who is a pretty good person during the week like everybody else, and just goes to church on Sunday. Well, that's not what any religious position is, and it's most certainly not what Christianity is. Christianity says weird things, like in Romans, where it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It says strange things like that we need to live according to the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we need to follow our lives need to example the truth of Jesus Christ. And that's more than a tack on. That's fundamental to who we are as believers. Again, I said a couple of weeks ago that I used the old Brennan Manning quote that DC Talk made famous in one of their songs. The single biggest cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who confess Jesus with their lips and then led on by their lifestyle. That's what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. That's partially true. It's also partially false. The problem isn't that we just led on by our lifestyle that we don't believe in Jesus. It's that we make Jesus a small part of our life, only a part of our life. We make the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the creator of the universe, who upholds the universe by the word of his power, we make him a tack on, an addition to our lives. We think things through based on what is wise for us, and then we tack on a Christian thing afterwards. It shows itself in a whole bunch of things. It's the reason that we as Christians so regularly avoid church. Why church attendance has gone down over the last 50 to 100 years, because people have simply stopped believing that the church was important, because they've stopped believing that Christianity is central to who we are. I guess I'm ranting here because I think there is a deeper problem with the culture than merely a whole bunch of laws, or than what we can do by voting in things or voting for specific politicians. I think the biggest problem is that we as Christians don't live like Christians. We don't talk like Christians. Most especially, we don't think and feel like Christians. You see, when Paul says in Romans 12 that we need to be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds, he doesn't say we need to be transformed by the renewing of our talking. We need to be renewed by the transformation of our voting. Those may come about because of what Paul says, but that's not the main point. The main point is that becoming a Christian is centrally a change in who you are. It's a change from a person who is enslaved to sin, who seeks after the wrong thing naturally, who is naturally a rebel to God, and changed suddenly. Behold, the old has gone, the new has come. An old heart is removed. The heart of stone is taken out and replaced with a heart of flesh. And those of you who are believers know where I'm getting these verses. Yeah. That's a central differentiation. And if that central differentiation has not happened, all the surface words in the world are not going to change anything. Our ability to pretend to be Christian will not last. We need to be really believers. That means centrally our thoughts have to be changed. Our ideas have to be changed. The way we value things has to be changed. And that will change the culture. Not because we have eliminated the opposition or we've changed the laws, but because we have shown that the Christian life is livable, that it looks like something. that it changes the way we act and the way we think, the way we believe. I guess I'm kind of ranting to try and get somebody to ask me a question. And nobody has done that yet. In any case, the reason I was thinking about this is because I saw something on Facebook a couple of days ago, a meme that somebody was saying that I'm liberal because I am okay with you being a believer. I just don't want you to enforce your beliefs on me. And I kind of agree and I kind of disagree. You see, what that assumes is that my Christian faith is something that is separable from my viewpoints and my beliefs in everything else. And that's wrong. The fact is, if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, if you are a Christian, that is going to affect the way you believe other things. And some of those things are because you are in fact a believer. I believe that the world is created, good. Therefore, I have specific beliefs about the environment and about the protection of the environment that I think are important. Because I think that we are called to steward the world and not merely to dominate it, I think it's important that we actually take care of the world we're in. It's why I recycle. Even if I don't think that recycling is generally the best way of doing it, it's also why I reduce and reuse, the two parts of the whole thing that's in trouble. Ooh, I do have a question. Thank you. In any case, I'll probably opine on that a little more later and at some other time. There is a question here by Ben Harper. What's the difference between Arianism and semi-Pelagianism? Now, I dealt with that a little bit on Tuesday night. On Tuesday nights, I do a theology session, and I've been dealing with the concept of grace alone. And I talked about this week on Tuesday night, Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism, because that's important when it comes to the doctrine of grace alone. Christians believe that we are saved by grace alone, apart from works of the law. Actually, I think that's what Christians believe generally, whether we're Protestant or not. Now, that's going to be different between another dichotomy. Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism are dichotomies against something called Augustinianism. Augustine of Hippo espoused it, and I think is the correct understanding of the Bible on this point. Just to let you know, Pelagianism is the belief that humans are born inherently good, that we are naturally capable of having a desire for God and the desire to seek after God. Pelagians would say that there is no such thing as original sin, that we have the freedom to be able to choose God or not, right from the beginning, right from the get-go. There is nothing that God has to do to give us extra ability to do that. Pelagian would also say that after conversion, you don't need any specific help of God to be able to live a holy, sinless life. You can live in obedience to God completely after becoming to saving faith in Jesus Christ, because you have the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Moses, and your own free will, all gifts of God, and that's where they would believe is God's grace. A semi-Pelagian, which means half Pelagian, believes that though we have free will to come to saving faith in God, but after that, God will give us power to be able to live a sinless life after that. So they would say that we have the free will to come to God, but after that, God gives us the strength and the gift to be able to be sanctified. So they would see that sanctification, the progressive bettering of the Christian, comes from the gift of God. So that's the Pelagian perspective. That neither of those perspectives is Christian. The reason is pretty simple. In sin did my mother conceive me. Every desire of my heart beforehand is wicked. As Romans is going to say, we are born as slaves to sin. Not merely people who have a free will to choose sin. We have sin. Now, That's Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism and the Christian perspective. There is, after the Protestant Reformation, there was another thing that rose up, a dichotomy between two major camps in belief about how God works. That's Arminianism and Calvinism. Calvinism after a guy named John Calvin, Arminianism after a guy named Jacobus Arminius. And they kind of compass the whole understanding of how you get saved. Calvinists believe that in order to be saved, God has to do a special work in your heart. And if he does the special work of your heart, in your heart, of regeneration, you come to saving faith as a result of God's work in your life. The Arminian believes that God does a specific work in your life to overcome the sin nature, to give you the free choice to come to saving faith. Both would state that there is prevenient grace of some form that God does on the sinner. And in that case, both of them avoid the concept of Pelagianism or semi-Pelagianism. So technically speaking, an Arminian is not a semi-Pelagian. They are semi-Pelagian in another sense. They're actually saying that we have free will, and thus they are taking some of the ideas of Pelagianism and putting it into their theology. But technically speaking, they're not Pelagian in the sense that, well, both Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism are heresies. Pelagianism was noted as a heresy earlier, and then a little bit later, semi-Pelagianism was noted as a heresy at the Council of Orange in about 514. So those are heresies. Arminianism is actually a major camp of Christian belief in the world today. Most evangelicals would be some form of either an Arminian or a Calvinist. Most, honestly, are Arminian. For example, Catholic theology is unapologetically within the Arminian camp. Now, again, I have to point this out. When I say Arminian and Calvinist, I don't mean that they are following John Calvin or following Jacobus Arminius. For example, I am a Calvinist, though I think Calvin is wrong on a lot of points. Some other day we can sit down and talk about where I think Calvin is wrong. And people had Calvinistic viewpoints before John Calvin. In fact, Augustine had very strongly what we would call now Calvinistic leanings, and he was born about 1,000 years before Calvin. Just the same, Jacobus Arminius was after Calvin, but Catholic theology is, broadly speaking, Arminian. It believes in a free will that's given to us by God's prevenient work. So that's, for Ben, that is the difference between Arianism and semi-Pelagianism. So Amanda is actually listening and asked me a question, something different. And actually, she asked the question, what does supralapsarian mean? And no, she didn't spell that wrong. That is, in fact, correct. And this is kind of a weird inside baseball theology thing. But, okay, if you're a Calvinist, you believe that God wills all things to the counsel of his nature. He has essentially two wills. So first of all, he has the revealed will, which is what you see in Scripture. Then he has a secret will of what actually happens. Calvinists would say that God has exhaustive knowledge and foreordination for all of nature. Now, that leads to a big question. Those of you who have gone to Sunday school and have learned your Bible stories recognize that there was a time that Adam and Eve lived in the garden without sin. So there was a time when they didn't have sin. Then the snake comes to Eve with Adam nearby, seduces Eve to grab a fruit from a tree. We don't know if it was an apple or not, contrary to popular opinion. So that's why I'm okay using apple products. I don't think it actually means the sin of Adam. But anyway, Adam takes the bite of the fruit and becomes a sinner. So the big question for a Calvinist then is, did God preordain the salvation of the world through Jesus and all of the ways of dealing with sin after Adam fell, the lapse, or before Adam fell? So there's two different camps. One camp says that God's foreordination started after the sin. So God was, created the world, created Eve and Adam, and created the Garden of Eden, and said, "Be fruitful and multiply," and all of that. And then the sin happened, and then God said, "Oh my, I have to fix this," and fixes it and sets all of nature up to glorify himself through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, gives the proto-evangelion in Genesis chapter 3, saying that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, and that's all as a response to the lapse. That position is called infralapsarianism. So that's infra, within the lapse. So the thing that's setting the whole thing up, the big bracket over all of history, is the sin. Supralapsarians believe that that God actually set up all things according to the foreknowledge of his will, including the first sin. Now, that comes to a problem, because God is not the author of sin. And yet, a supralapsarian is going to say that God still knew that Adam and Eve were going to sin and set up the world specifically as he did, knowing that they would sin. So he, at some sense, well, it sounds like he willed sin, doesn't it? And as a result, but anyway, the problem is going to be that sounds like God has ordained sin. The Calvinist usually will respond, or the supralapsarian Calvinist will usually respond with a Bible passage, a Bible verse, response that Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat guy who the last of the sons, what was his name? Anyway, that one of the brothers said to the other brothers in Israel, or in Egypt, just as Jacob died. And that was, what you have intended for evil, God has intended for good. And so the concept there is, God can have good intentions for what is for us sin. Joseph, thank you very much, Amanda. I appreciate it. In any case, that's supralapsarianism and infralapsarianism. It's kind of a really inside baseball thing, but if you want, you can drop that now at parties, and people will think you're crazy, like they do for me all the time. John Troke points out that Calvinists are known for their facial hair. The more luxurious and full your beard, the more Calvinist you are. I would normally completely agree with the good Mr. Troke with that, but my beard is kind of scraggly and small, and I get a big bald spot right here if I try to grow it out. So, and I am a pretty good Calvinist, I think. Therefore, that can't always be universally true. Alrighty then. So, again, thank you for actually bringing me questions this week. If you could, please give me a few questions in advance, so that I can actually have something to respond to next week. I will continue to do these on Thursday nights. I am debating changing the format a little bit. I will be talking about that later. I might actually try to get somebody else to banter with. And so as a result, hopefully we'd be able to figure that out. Amanda tells me that my good friend Daniel, her husband, would point out that good Calvinist is a contradiction. And he's probably right. After all, Calvinists believe that we are totally depraved. And so, yeah. Actually, an Arminian could claim that there is such thing as a good Calvinist. A Calvinist couldn't claim to be a good Calvinist. Anyway, neither here nor there. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. I apologize for the rambling nature of this evening. I do rather enjoy talking to people, so hopefully this will continue on. If you have added questions, I will point out that you can drop me a line at steve.daw@mile1mission.ca or steve@considering828.org. I'm thinking that in the future, I'm probably going to have somebody else with me here. So I might do interviews, I might do banter. We'll see how it goes. In any case, drop me a line. Let me know how things are going. And yeah, thank you for showing up. I hope you have a great week.